The fern by the window was dying despite my husband's meticulous care. "Don't water it too much," Caleb warned before leaving on his business trip, that familiar tension tightening his voice. Years of marriage, and I never understood his strange attachment to this unremarkable plant until my fingers brushed something metal beneath the soil that day. The rusted box emerged like a confession, its contents, a silver locket, faded photographs, and a note reading, "I'm sorry," unraveling the perfect lie I'd been living. As I held another woman's memories in my trembling hands, I realized that some secrets don't stay buried, no matter how carefully you tend the ground above them. And my husband wasn't who I thought he was at all. The quiet in our house had a weight to it. 3 years of marriage to Caleb, and sometimes I still found myself listening for sounds that weren't there. The patter of little feet, perhaps, or the chaos of family life that we'd chosen to postpone. Our Vermont home was perfect in its stillness, nestled among maple trees that whispered secrets I couldn't quite catch. But lately, that stillness had started to feel less like peace and more like something waiting. "Emma," Caleb called from the front door, his overnight bag already packed by his feet. "Remember what I said about the plants?" I nodded absently from the kitchen where I was washing breakfast dishes. "Water the violets daily, miss the orchid, and leave your precious fern alone." I smiled at him, trying to mask my slight annoyance. After 3 years, I knew the drill. Caleb's expression softened, but I caught that familiar flicker of concern in his eyes. "The fern is sensitive," he reminded me, like he always did before leaving. "Too much water and it'll drown." The fern in question sat in its weathered clay pot by the bay window, its delicate fronds slightly drooping despite Caleb's meticulous care. He claimed it was a gift from his late Aunt Meredith, the only family heirloom he'd managed to hold on to after his parents died. I'd never met any of his family. They were all gone before we'd even started dating, which made the plant's importance to him both touching and slightly perplexing. I know, I said, drying my hands on a dish towel before walking over to kiss him goodbye. "It's only 3 days. I promise your plant will survive." Caleb pulled me close, his cologne, subtle and woodsy, enveloping me. "I trust you," he murmured into my hair, but something in his tone suggested otherwise. After he left, I stood watching his car disappear down our long driveway. Caleb was heading to Boston for a financial security conference. That's what he did, kept other people's money safe, built digital fortresses around wealth. He was methodical about everything in his life, from the way he arranged his sock drawer to how he scheduled our monthly budget reviews. His career suited him perfectly. He'd been with Anderson Financial for nearly a decade, longer than I'd known him. I wandered back into the living room, my gaze drawn to the fern. Something about Caleb's attachment to it felt strange, especially given how he rarely spoke about his past. When we first started dating, I'd assumed his reticence came from grief. Losing both parents in his early 20s couldn't have been easy. But as time passed, I realized there were whole chapters of his life that remained closed books. Whenever I'd ask about his childhood or his college years, he'd offer vague responses before skillfully changing the subject. That evening, I curled up on the couch with a mug of chamomile tea and my current read, enjoying the rare solitude. Our house was a beautiful colonial revival, too big for just the two of us really, but Caleb had insisted we'd grow into it. The wooden floors creaked occasionally as if the house itself was settling into sleep. My eyes drifted from my book to the fern, silhouetted against the fading light. I remembered the time, about 6 months ago, when I tried to move it to a sunnier spot. Caleb had just gotten home from work and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me lifting the pot. "Leave it," he'd snapped, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. He'd immediately apologized, claimed he was stressed from work, but something about his reaction had lingered with me. It was the same look that had flashed across his face this morning, a subtle panic, quickly masked. The next day passed uneventfully. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, spoke with a couple of clients, and FaceTimed my sister Laura. Caleb texted around noon. "Conference going well. How's everything at home?" "All good here," I replied. "Plants are behaving themselves." I added a winking emoji, hoping to lighten the mood. His response came hours later. Great. Don't forget about the fern. That night, I found myself standing in front of the plant again. It looked particularly droopy, its fronds curling inward like wilting fingers. Caleb had watered it before leaving. I'd watched him do it, but the soil looked bone dry. I pressed my finger against the surface, feeling nothing but dusty earth. He said not to water you too much, I whispered to the plant. But he didn't say not to water you at all. I went to the kitchen and filled a small cup with water, just enough to dampen the soil, without soaking it. Back at the fern, I carefully began to pour, watching as the water disappeared into the dirt. As I added the last few drops, my fingers grazed something hard beneath the surface. Frowning, I set the cup down and gently probed the soil. There was definitely something there, something solid and unyielding. Curiosity overwhelmed me. I scraped away a thin layer of dirt with my fingertip and spotted what looked like a rusted metal edge. My heart began to beat faster. I glanced at the door as if Caleb might walk in at any moment, then turned back to the plant. Carefully, so as not to damage the fern's roots, I worked my fingers around the object, loosening the packed soil. What emerged was a shallow, square metal box, about the size of a thick paperback book. It was weathered and corroded, with flecks of rust staining my fingertips. The fern's roots had grown around it, embracing the box as if it were part of them. I extracted it as gently as I could, though I still heard the snap of tender roots breaking. The weight of it surprised me, heavier than it looked, solid and secretive. I held it in my hands, feeling the cool metal against my skin, and took a deep breath. Something about this felt forbidden, like I was crossing a boundary Caleb had silently established. But another part of me, the part that had always sensed the gaps in my husband's stories, needed to know. I carried the box to the kitchen table and set it down under the bright overhead light. The lid was sealed shut with what looked like years of corrosion. I worked at it with a butter knife, prying gently until I heard the satisfying pop of the seal breaking. Heart pounding, I lifted the lid. Inside the box lay several items, nestled against each other like silent witnesses to some forgotten moment. A vintage silver locket on a tarnished chain. 2 photographs, their edges yellowed and curling. And beneath them, a folded note, the paper brittle with age. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the note first. The handwriting was tight and cramped, the ink faded to a pale brown. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen like this.
No signature.
No date. Just those 11 words, heavy with unspoken meaning. I set the note aside and picked up the photographs. The first showed a young woman with long, dark hair, cradling an infant in her arms. She was smiling, but her eyes held a sadness that seemed to reach across time. The baby, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, was tiny, newborn, by the looks of it, with wisps of dark hair visible beneath a knitted cap. The second photo made my breath catch. It was of a house, a small, 2-story farmhouse with white clapboard siding and dark green shutters. A wraparound porch extended along the front, with a swing hanging from rusty chains. Something about it seemed vaguely familiar, though I was certain I'd never been there. Finally, I picked up the locket. It was heavier than it looked, the silver dull with age. The clasp was stiff, but it yielded after a few attempts. Inside was a tiny piece of cloth, a scrap of what looked like a baby's blanket, and a name etched into the metal. Delia. Delia. The name meant nothing to me. In all our years together, Caleb had never mentioned anyone called Delia. Not a relative, not a friend, not an ex. Yet here was her name, hidden in a box beneath his precious fern. I closed the locket and sat back, staring at the items spread before me. Who was this woman? Was the baby hers? And what did any of this have to do with my husband? I reached for my phone, intending to call Caleb, but stopped. What would I say? Hey, I know you told me not to touch your plant, but I did and found a secret box. Care to explain? The conversation played out in my head, and none of the versions ended well. Instead, I took photos of everything, the box, the note, the photographs, the locket, and then carefully returned the items to their container. I didn't put the box back in the plant, though. I couldn't bring myself to bury it again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman in the photo, about the name Delia etched into silver, about Caleb, and all the things I didn't know about him. Around 2 in the morning, I slipped out of bed and padded to Caleb's home office. I'd never gone through his things before. It had always seemed like a violation of trust, but the box had changed everything. The locked drawer in his desk yielded easily to the spare key we kept in the kitchen junk drawer. Inside, I found the expected items: bank statements, our marriage certificate, his passport. But beneath them was a stack of old letters, bound with a faded blue ribbon. The top envelope, yellowed with age, was addressed to someone named JT. There was no return address and no stamp. It had never been mailed. I hesitated before opening it, aware that I was crossing another line. But I'd already come this far. The letter inside was dated 15 years ago, when Caleb would have been in his early 20s. It began, "Dear James," and was signed simply, C. The contents were vague, something about moving again, about starting fresh, about how much he missed home but couldn't return. It raised more questions than it answered. As I was returning the letter to its envelope, I noticed something written on the back of the house photograph, an address. The handwriting was shaky, different from that on the note, but the address was complete: a rural road about 2 hours north of us, in a small town I'd driven through once or twice. My phone rang suddenly in the quiet house, making me jump. It was Caleb. At 2:30 in the morning. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound sleepy rather than guilty. "Everything okay?" "Just checking in," he said, his voice tight. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd see how you're doing."
I'm fine, elite.
"Just woke up for some water." "And the house? Everything's normal?" "Of course," I said, wondering what exactly he was asking. "Why wouldn't it be?" "No reason," he said quickly. "Just, worried about you alone there." "The fern's fine too," I added, unable to resist. There was a pause, just a fraction too long. "Good," he said finally. "That's good." After we hung up, I sat in the dark office, my mind racing. The call felt off, like he somehow knew what I'd found. I sent him a casual text. "Everything okay with you? Unusual for you to call so late." No reply. That night, I dreamed of someone knocking on our bedroom window. A woman's voice whispered my name, urgent and pleading. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. The digital clock read 4:17 a.m. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. I got up and checked the window. Nothing there, of course. Just the black night and my own reflection staring back at me. The next morning, I called in sick to my video meeting with a client. I couldn't focus on font choices and color palettes, not with the mystery of the box consuming my thoughts. Instead, I searched the address from the photograph online. The satellite view confirmed it. This was definitely the house from the picture, though it looked more weathered now, the property overgrown. According to property records, it had been abandoned for at least a decade, foreclosed by the bank after the owner defaulted on the mortgage. The owner's name was listed as Thompson D. D for Delia? I became obsessed, scouring the internet for any connection between Caleb and this Delia Thompson. There was nothing, no social media links, no mentions in local news articles, nothing that tied them together. It was as if one of them didn't exist, or as if someone had deliberately erased their connection. By noon, I'd made my decision. I packed a small bag with water, snacks, and my phone charger. I locked the metal box in my glove compartment. And then I got in my car and headed north, toward the address on the back of the photograph. The 2-hour drive north stretched before me like a confession waiting to be heard. I followed my GPS through winding country roads, watching as manicured suburbs gave way to fields and forests. The late summer air was thick with humidity, and dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising an afternoon storm. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white with tension. What was I doing? Driving to an abandoned house based on a photograph I'd found buried under my husband's plant? It sounded absurd, even to me. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever waited at that address was something I needed to face. The GPS announced my arrival as I pulled onto a narrow gravel driveway. The house stood before me, exactly as it had appeared in the photograph, though time had worked its cruelty on the structure. The white paint was now gray and peeling, the green shutters hanging askew or missing entirely. The porch swing still hung from rusty chains, swaying slightly in the breeze, as if recently vacated. I sat in my car for several minutes, engine off, gathering courage. The house looked abandoned, as the property records had indicated, but something about it felt lived in. A sense of waiting permeated the air, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Finally, I stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my shoes impossibly loud in the rural silence. The air smelled of approaching rain and wild honeysuckle that had overtaken one side of the house. I made my way toward the front porch, each step feeling like a trespass. The porch boards creaked beneath my weight as I approached the front door. A faded "no trespassing" sign hung crookedly, its warning weathered almost to illegibility. I knocked anyway, not expecting an answer. None came. I circled around to the back of the house, stepping carefully through overgrown grass. The backyard must have once been beautiful. I could make out the remnants of a garden, now choked with weeds, and what looked like an old fire pit surrounded by stones. Near a massive oak tree sat a child's swing set, its metal frame rusted, a single swing hanging from frayed rope. Beside it lay a plastic toy shovel, faded from red to pink by years of sun exposure. The back door stood slightly ajar, as if someone had recently left and forgotten to pull it closed. My heartbeat quickened as I approached. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and frightened to my own ears. "Is anyone here?" Silence answered me. I pushed the door open wider, wincing at the squeal of hinges. "I'm just looking around," I announced to the empty house. "I don't mean any harm." The kitchen I stepped into was frozen in time. Dishes still in the drying rack, a faded calendar on the wall showing a month from 14 years ago. A thin layer of dust covered everything, disturbed in places by what looked like recent footprints. I moved further into the house, each room revealing new fragments of a life interrupted. The living room held a piano with yellowed keys, sheet music still open to a half-finished song. On the mantel, family photos in tarnished frames showed the woman from the locket, Delia, I presumed, at various ages. In some, she was alone. In others, with an older couple who might have been her parents. In one corner of the living room, a small desk held stacks of old newspaper clippings and what looked like children's drawings, simple crayon pictures of houses and stick figures. I leafed through them carefully, searching for what? I wasn't sure. A creak from upstairs froze me in place. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the house settling, I told myself, though my racing heart suggested otherwise. The staircase protested loudly as I made my way to the second floor. A narrow hallway led to several bedrooms, their doors standing open like mouths ready to share secrets. The first room appeared to be a master bedroom, simple furnishings, a double bed with a faded quilt, curtains stirring gently in the breeze from a partially open window. The second room made my breath catch. A nursery, preserved as if waiting for a child to return. The crib was empty, a mobile of cloth stars hanging motionless above it. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a knitted blanket draped across its arm. The walls were painted a soft yellow, with a border of dancing animals running around the perimeter. On a small side table lay a photo album, its cover embossed with the words, "Baby's First Year." I opened it with trembling hands. The first few pages showed the woman, Delia, pregnant, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. Later pages showed the infant from the locket photo, growing from newborn to a few months old. Then, abruptly, the album stopped. The remaining pages were empty, waiting for milestones that were never recorded. I moved to a dresser in the corner of the nursery and began opening drawers. Baby clothes, carefully folded. Tiny socks. A christening gown, yellowed with age. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a blanket, I found what looked like a journal bound in worn leather. The first page bore a single sentence in flowing script. "This house holds everything I lost, and everything he stole." My hands shook as I turned the pages. The journal belonged to Delia Thompson, and it told a story that turned my blood to ice. She wrote about meeting a man, Caleb, though never by his full name, who had come into her life when she was at her lowest. How he'd helped her financially after her parents died, how they'd fallen in love, how she'd gotten pregnant, how happy they'd been at first. Then came entries about arguments, about his increasing control, about his insistence they move away from everyone she knew, about her growing fear. The final entries were frantic, the handwriting jagged and urgent. She wrote about waking one morning to find both Caleb and their infant daughter gone, about calling the police, who didn't take her seriously at first. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. Just a man who had left with his own child. By the time they began to investigate, Caleb had vanished. With the baby, their daughter. I closed the journal, feeling sick. This couldn't be my Caleb. Not the man I'd married. The man who color-coded his sock drawer and surprised me with my favorite coffee on Monday mornings. Not the man who'd held me through my father's funeral, who'd stayed up all night when my sister was in a car accident. Yet even as I denied it, pieces were falling into place. His reluctance to talk about his past. The way he'd never wanted children, despite my occasional hints. The fact that I'd never met any of his family, that there were no childhood photos among his possessions. Thunder rumbled outside, closer now. I needed to leave soon, before the storm hit, before whoever had left those fresh footprints returned. I took one last look around the nursery, trying to absorb every detail, when something caught my eye. Behind a frame on the wall, something protruded slightly. I lifted the frame, a child's certificate of birth, and found another photograph hidden behind it. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. It was Caleb, younger, with longer hair, but unmistakably him. He was holding the same baby from the locket photo, smiling broadly. The mother's face had been violently scratched out of the picture, leaving only ragged paper behind. My heart felt like it had been torn from my chest. The man I loved, the man I'd built a life with, had another life before me. A child. A woman he'd abandoned. Or worse. A car door slammed outside, jolting me from my thoughts. I rushed to the window, expecting to see Caleb somehow, impossibly, standing in the driveway. Instead, an old pickup truck had parked next to my car. A man stepped out, elderly, moving with the aid of a cane, his face weathered as the house itself. I quickly gathered the journal and the torn photo, shoving them into my bag. Then, taking a deep breath, I made my way downstairs and out onto the front porch. The old man stood at the bottom of the steps, leaning heavily on his cane. His eyes, sharp beneath bushy white brows, assessed me without surprise. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice as rough as gravel. "I know," I admitted. "I'm sorry for trespassing. I faltered, unsure how to explain my presence. "You found something," he stated. Not a question. I nodded slowly. A box. Under a plant. With a locket and photos and you came looking for answers." He sighed heavily, shifting his weight. He told me he buried that part of himself. Said it was the only way he could move forward. "You know Caleb?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The old man's face hardened. "I knew James Turner when he lived here with my niece. Before he took her baby and disappeared." James Turner.
JT.
Not Caleb Anderson at all. "I don't understand," I said, though the terrible truth was already forming in my mind. "The baby. Gone," the old man said flatly. "Both of them. Police never found either one. Nearly killed Delia, the not knowing." Rain began to fall, fat drops that quickly turned into a downpour. Neither of us moved. "Is Delia?" I couldn't finish the question.
"Dead," he said.
3 years ago. Cancer. She never stopped looking for her daughter. Never stopped hoping. 3 years ago. Around the time Caleb and I bought our house. Around the time he'd brought home the fern and placed it by the window. The old man reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age but protected from the rain by his coat. "She wrote this the day he left. Maybe now you'll understand." He held it out to me, his hand surprisingly steady. Then maybe you can tell me why you're wearing my niece's face. I took the letter with numb fingers, suddenly aware of what he meant. The woman in the photos, Delia, did look like me. Same dark hair, same heart-shaped face, same slight build. Had Caleb chosen me because I reminded him of her? The old man turned and walked back to his truck without another word, leaving me standing in the rain, clutching a dead woman's letter and the shattered pieces of my marriage. The drive home was a blur. Rain hammered against my windshield, matching the storm inside my head. Delia's letter lay unopened on the passenger seat. I couldn't bring myself to read it yet, couldn't bear to add another woman's pain to my own. By the time I pulled into our driveway, darkness had fallen. Our house, the one I'd thought of as a sanctuary, now loomed before me like a stranger's dwelling. The porch light Caleb always left on for me glowed with false welcome. Inside, I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt alien. The wedding photo on the mantel. The throw blanket Caleb had given me last Christmas. The fern, still sitting innocently by the window, its soil disturbed where I'd unearthed the box. I made myself a cup of tea with shaking hands and sat at the kitchen table. Methodically, I spread out everything I'd gathered, the metal box and its contents, Delia's journal, the torn photograph, and her sealed letter. Pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to complete. Finally, I opened the letter. The handwriting inside was the same flowing script as the journal, though steadier, more controlled. It was dated 15 years ago. To whoever finds him, it began. He calls himself James Turner now, but that's not his real name. He's taken my daughter. Please, if you're reading this, help me find her. She's only 2 years old. He's all she knows, and he can be so loving, so convincing. But there's another side to him. A side that lies, that vanishes in the night, that steals a child from her mother. The letter continued, describing their relationship, how they'd met at a grief support group after her parents died in a car accident. How charming he'd been, how supportive through her pregnancy. How things had changed after the baby was born. He became obsessive, she wrote. Said she wasn't safe with me. Said I couldn't protect her like he could. The night before they disappeared, I told him I wanted to visit my uncle, to get away for a few days. Just the baby and me. He smiled and said it was a good idea. The next morning they were gone. So was my car. So were her things. The final paragraph turned my blood to ice. If he tells you it's just a plant, ask him what he planted in me. I set the letter down, hands trembling. The strange warning echoed in my head, cryptic yet somehow threatening. What did she mean? I spent the night poring over everything, searching for clues, for explanations, for anything that might make sense of what I discovered. By morning, my eyes were gritty with exhaustion, my mind spinning with questions without answers. Caleb would be home tonight. Less than 12 hours to decide what to do. I showered and changed, trying to wash away the feeling of betrayal that clung to me like a second skin. Then I began to prepare. I carefully photographed everything, the journal entries, the photos, the letter, and uploaded them to my secure cloud storage. I made copies of the most damning pages and hid them in my office, in a portfolio of old design work where Caleb would never look. The original items I returned to the metal box, except for the locket. That I placed deliberately on the kitchen counter, where he would see it as soon as he walked in. Then I waited, watching the hours tick by. I tried to work, tried to eat, tried to pretend that my world hadn't just imploded. But my mind kept circling back to the same terrible questions. Who was the man I'd married? What had happened to Delia's daughter? And who was Caleb Anderson, if not the person I thought I knew? At 5:37 p.m., I heard his car in the driveway. The sound of the garage door opening. Footsteps on the stairs. And then he was there, overnight bag in hand, smile on his face, the same face I'd woken up beside for 3 years. "Hey, you," he said warmly, dropping his bag to wrap me in an embrace. "Miss me?" I forced myself to hug him back, to smile, to act as if nothing had changed. Of course, I lied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "How is everything here?" he asked, moving into the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. Any problems? None, I said, following him. Everything was just fine. I watched him carefully, studying his movements, his expressions. This man who was both familiar and a complete stranger. Did his eyes linger a fraction too long on the fern? Did he check the soil, looking for disturbance? We fell into our usual evening routine, Caleb unpacking while I started dinner, talking about his conference, about my work, about nothing that mattered. All the while, I waited for him to notice the locket gleaming on the counter, placed where the sunlight would catch its silver surface. It wasn't until after dinner, as he loaded the dishwasher, that he saw it. His hand froze mid-reach for a plate, his body going completely still. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, not turning around. "From your aunt's plant," I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. Slowly, he turned to face me. His expression was unreadable, a perfect mask of control. But his eyes were filled with a storm of emotions: fear, anger, grief, recognition. "Emma," he said carefully, "I can explain." "Can you?" I asked. "Can you explain who Delia Thompson is? Or why there was a box buried under your precious fern? Or maybe why you've been living under a false name?" His face drained of color, the mask cracking. "You went to the house," he said. It wasn't a question. "I met her uncle," I confirmed. "He gave me her letter." Caleb, James, whoever he was, sank into a chair, his legs seeming to give out. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice barely audible. "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because what I think is that you stole a child from her mother. What I think is that everything about our life together has been a lie." He looked up at me, his eyes haunted. "Not everything," he said. "Not us. What I feel for you has always been real." "Like what you felt for Delia?" I asked sharply. "Before you abandoned her and took her baby?" His face contorted with what looked like genuine pain. "It was complicated," he said. She wasn't well after the baby came. She had severe postpartum depression. She wouldn't get help. He swallowed hard. She was a danger to herself, to our daughter. "So you kidnapped your own child," I said flatly. "I protected her," he corrected, a flash of defiance crossing his features. "I did what I had to do. You don't know what it was like, seeing Delia deteriorate, finding her standing over the crib at night, just staring at the baby with this empty look." I thought of the journal, of Delia's desperate entries. They told a different story, of a man who had become controlling, paranoid, who had isolated her from friends and family, who had gaslighted her when she expressed concern about his behavior. "The police looked for you," I said. "For both of you." He laughed bitterly. "Not very hard. A father taking his own child? With no evidence of violence? It was a custody dispute, as far as they were concerned." "Where is she?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me since I'd first opened the box. "Where's your daughter?" His expression closed off again. "Safe," he said firmly. "That's all that matters." I left him sitting there and went to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I couldn't bear to sleep beside him, couldn't stand to feel his skin against mine, not with the weight of his deception crushing my chest. In the morning, I called a private investigator. I sent him copies of everything I'd found: the photos, the journal entries, Delia's letter. "I need to know what happened," I told him. "I need to find the truth." For the next week, Caleb and I circled each other warily. We slept in separate rooms. We ate meals in silence. We were ghosts haunting the same house, tethered by secrets neither of us knew how to confront. I left clues to test him: the journal open on the coffee table, Delia's photo propped against a lamp. Each time, he reacted with tightly controlled emotion, never admitting, never denying, just watching me with those haunted eyes, as if waiting for me to make a decision he couldn't make himself. Then, 10 days after my visit to the house, the investigator called. I found some records. The investigator, Frank Matheson, told me over coffee at a diner 30 miles from our house. I'd insisted on meeting far from home, somewhere Caleb wouldn't accidentally see us. Frank slid a folder across the table. "Delia Thompson did report James Turner for kidnapping 14 years ago. Police investigated, but not very thoroughly. There was no evidence of foul play, and Turner had legal custody as the father. They classified it as a custody dispute and basically dropped it after a few months. I flipped through the photocopied police reports, seeing the same story from a different angle. What about the daughter? Did you find any trace of her? Frank nodded, his weathered face solemn. That's where it gets interesting. About 6 months after the disappearance, a girl matching her description was placed in a private adoption in Maine. The paperwork was... He hesitated. Irregular. Forged birth certificate, no proper surrender of parental rights. The kind of adoption that happens when someone wants to move a child quickly and quietly. My stomach lurched. So he gave her away? Not exactly, Frank said, pulling out another document. The adoptive parents were registered as Margaret and William Peterson. I don't know those names, I said, scanning the document. You wouldn't, Frank agreed. But here's what's interesting. Margaret Peterson's maiden name was Turner. James Turner's sister. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. His sister? He gave his daughter to his sister to raise? Frank nodded. It looks that way. They moved frequently for the next few years, Maine, then New Hampshire, finally settling in Massachusetts about 7 years ago. The girl's name was changed from Laura Turner to Maya Peterson. She's 17 now, a junior in high school. Does she know? I whispered. About any of this? Hard to say, Frank replied. But given the secrecy, the forged documents, I'd guess not. He slid one final photograph across the table. A school portrait of a teenage girl with dark hair and familiar eyes, Caleb's eyes. She was smiling, but there was something guarded in her expression, something that reminded me painfully of her father. Where is she now? I asked, unable to tear my gaze from the photo. Living with the Petersons in Waltham, about an hour from here. Frank gave me the address. I'd be careful how you approach this, Mrs. Anderson. There's a lot at stake for a lot of people. I drove home in a daze, the folder hidden in my trunk, Maya's face burned into my memory. All these years, Caleb's daughter had been living just an hour away. Close enough to visit. Had he seen her? Did she know who he really was? When I walked into the house, Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. The journal lay open in front of him, Delia's handwriting accusing him from beyond the grave. You found her, didn't you? He asked quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. He closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. I need to explain, he said. I need you to understand why I did what I did. Then tell me, I said, taking the seat across from him. Tell me everything. No more lies. He took a deep breath. Delia and I met 15 years ago, like she wrote. I was using my real name then, James Turner. We fell in love. She got pregnant. We were happy, at first. His fingers traced the edge of the journal. After Laura was born, Delia changed. She couldn't sleep, wouldn't eat. She'd stare at the baby for hours without moving. The doctor called it postpartum depression, prescribed medication, but she wouldn't take it. Said it made her feel foggy, disconnected. Things got worse, he continued. She'd leave the baby alone in the house while she walked for hours. Once I came home and found Laura crying in her crib, soaked through, while Delia was in the backyard, just staring at nothing. Another time, I found her holding Laura over the upstairs railing, saying she wanted to see if babies could fly. I felt a chill. That's not in her journal. Of course it's not, he said bitterly. She didn't remember half the things she did. Or she rewrote them in her mind to make herself the victim. So you took the baby? He nodded. I was terrified. I called my sister Margaret. She and William had been trying to have a child for years without success. We came up with a plan. I took Laura in the night, drove to Maine. We changed her name to Maya. Created a new identity for her. And for me. Why didn't you just fight for custody? I asked. Legally? His laugh was hollow. With what evidence? Delia was careful around other people. She'd pull herself together when we had company. Her uncle never saw the bad episodes. I had no proof, and everyone knew mothers almost always get custody, even when there are concerns. So you disappeared, I said. Changed your name to Caleb Anderson. Left Delia to wonder what happened to her child for the rest of her life. He flinched. I did what I thought was right. I protected my daughter. And Maya? I asked. Does she know any of this? He shook his head. Margaret and William are the only parents she remembers. They've raised her as their own. She thinks I'm just her Uncle Caleb who visits occasionally. You've seen her? This revelation felt like another betrayal. A few times a year, he admitted. Birthday, Christmas. Enough to stay in her life, but not enough to raise questions. And the plant? I asked, glancing at the fern still sitting by the window. Why keep a box of memories buried where you have to see it every day? His expression softened slightly. I buried the box when I heard Delia had died. 3 years ago. I didn't want to forget her completely. Despite everything, she was Laura's mother. Maya's mother. I couldn't throw those memories away, but I couldn't look at them every day either. You married me 3 months after she died, I said, the timeline suddenly clear. Is that why you chose me? Because I look like her? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. No, he said firmly. God, no, Emma. I fell in love with you because you're you. The resemblance. I didn't even notice it at first. Maybe subconsciously, but... He reached for my hand. I pulled away. I need to meet her, I said. His face drained of color. What? No. Absolutely not. You can't tell her any of this. It would destroy her life, her relationship with Margaret and William. I'm not going to tell her anything, I assured him. But I need to see her. To know she's okay. To understand what all of this was for. She won't know who you are, he warned. Good, I replied. Because I don't know who you are either. I called the private investigator again that night, arranging to learn more about Maya's routine. Where she went to school, what activities she participated in. I didn't want to approach her directly. Caleb was right about that much. Dropping this bomb on a 17-year-old would be cruel. But I needed to see her just once. To confirm for myself that she was happy, well-adjusted. That Caleb's terrible choice had at least given her a good life. Caleb refused to join me. I can't be part of this, he said. It's too dangerous. If she recognizes me, if she starts asking questions. Fine, I told him. But write her a letter. Something I can give her if the moment seems right. He wrote it that night, sealed it in an envelope without letting me read it. Just in case, he said, handing it to me with trembling fingers. But promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't hurt her. I took the letter. I would never hurt her, I said. Unlike you, I don't abandon people I care about. The words were cruel, but I couldn't take them back. Didn't want to. The man I'd thought I knew had never existed. In his place stood a stranger who had made a terrible choice and lived with its consequences for 14 years. As I prepared to leave the next morning, I looked at the fern one last time. I'm throwing this out when I get back, I told him. Whatever happens, we can't keep living with ghosts. He didn't argue. I found Maya Peterson exactly where Frank said she would be, at a small coffee shop near her high school, studying with friends. I sat at a corner table, nursing a latte, watching her from behind my laptop screen. She looked so much like the photos of Delia, it made my chest ache. The same dark hair, the same heart-shaped face. But her expressions, her mannerisms, those were pure Caleb. The careful way she arranged her books, the slight furrow between her brows when she concentrated. I'd seen those exact movements in my husband 1,000 times. Her friends left one by one as the afternoon wore on, until Maya sat alone, absorbed in her textbook. I gathered my courage and approached her table. Excuse me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Is this seat taken? It's getting crowded in here. She glanced up, offered a polite smile. No, go ahead. I sat down, searching her face for any sign of recognition. There was none, just the mild curiosity of a teenager confronted with a stranger. Studying hard? I asked, nodding toward her books. AP Biology, she said with a grimace. Test on Friday. You don't like science? She shrugged. It's okay. I'm better at art, though. That's what I want to do in college.
Art,
Something Caleb had never mentioned about her mother. What kind of art?
I asked.
Mostly painting. Some photography. Her eyes lit up, the reserve melting slightly. I have a show next month at school. My first real exhibition. That's wonderful, I said, meaning it. Your parents must be proud.
They are, she agreed.
My mom's already planning this huge reception. It's kind of embarrassing. Moms are like that, I said, wondering about the woman who had raised her, Margaret, Caleb's sister. Had she known the truth about Maya's mother? Had she helped perpetuate the lie? We chatted for a few more minutes, about school, about art, about the coffee shop's terrible playlist. Normal conversation, nothing deep. But I watched her carefully, looking for signs of trauma, of unhappiness. I saw none. She seemed like a typical teenager, sometimes awkward, sometimes confident, full of plans for a future that stretched endlessly before her. I should go, she said eventually, gathering her books. My dad's picking me up soon. William Peterson. Not Caleb. Not James Turner. Another man entirely, who had raised Delia's daughter as his own. Wait, I said impulsively. I have something for you. She frowned, confused. For me? But you don't know me. I hesitated, then pulled out the silver locket. Not Caleb's letter, that remained in my purse, suddenly seeming like the wrong choice. But the locket had been buried for years, waiting to be found.
Perhaps this was why.
This is going to sound strange, I said carefully. But I think this belongs to you. It was entrusted to me to give to you when the time was right. She took it cautiously, turning the tarnished silver over in her hands. What is it?
A locket, I said.
It's very old. It belonged to someone who loved you very much. She opened it, squinting at the name engraved inside. Delia? I don't know anyone named Delia. She knew you, I said softly. A long time ago. Maya studied my face, suddenly wary. Who are you? Just someone passing through, I said, standing up. Someone who believes that truth finds its way to the surface, eventually. I left her there, staring at the locket, questions blooming in her eyes that I wouldn't answer. Not today. Maybe not ever. That wasn't my decision to make. Outside, I leaned against my car, breathing deeply. Maya was alive. She was healthy, educated, apparently loved. Whatever else Caleb had done, he had saved her from a potentially dangerous situation and given her a stable home. Did that justify his actions? The law would say no. My heart wasn't sure. When I returned home, Caleb was waiting, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Well, he demanded as soon as I walked in. Did you see her? Did you talk to her? She's beautiful, I said simply. She wants to be an artist. His face softened, pride and grief mingling in his expression. Like her mother, he whispered. Delia was a painter. Before everything went wrong. I gave her the locket, I admitted. His eyes widened in alarm. You what? Emma, we agreed. I didn't tell her anything, I assured him. Just that it belonged to someone who loved her. She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know about you or Delia or any of it. And the letter? I pulled it from my purse, still sealed. It didn't feel right. Not yet. He took it with visible relief, then crumpled it in his fist. Maybe it's better this way. Let her have her life. What about her life? I asked quietly. Where do we go from here, Caleb? Or should I call you James? He flinched. I've been Caleb Anderson for 14 years. That's who I am now. A man built on lies, I said. How can I trust anything about you? Because you know everything now, he said, his voice breaking. Every terrible choice. Every secret. There's nothing left to hide. I thought about Delia, whose desperate search for her daughter had ended only with her death. About Maya, growing up with adoptive parents who loved her but had participated in a deception that had shaped her entire existence. About Caleb, living a double life built on fear and protection and love and lies. I need time, I told him. To process all of this. To decide what I can live with. He nodded, resignation in every line of his body. I understand. That night, I went to the bay window and removed the fern from its place of honor. I took it outside and dug a hole in the garden, deep enough to contain both the plant and its weighted history. As I covered it with earth, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. In its place, I set a small potted African violet, a plant with no secrets, no buried past, just vibrant purple flowers reaching toward the light. When Caleb came down in the morning and saw the empty space by the window, he paused, his face unreadable. Then he noticed the violet, touched one of its delicate petals with a tentative finger. A new beginning? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. I don't know, I answered honestly. But at least not the same ending. I thought about Maya, 17 and unaware, wearing her mother's locket without understanding its significance. About the truth that might someday rise to the surface, like a seed pushing through soil toward the sun. About the husband I thought I knew, and the stranger I had married, and the blurred line between them. Some plants thrive in darkness, roots tangled around secrets. Others need light to grow. The choice of what to nurture, what to reveal, what to bury, that was still mine to make. What would you do if the person you loved most turned out to be someone else entirely? Would you bury the truth or let it grow into something new? If this story of secrets and second chances resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more psychological thrillers that explore the shadows within ordinary lives.